Dirty Moderates, I want to go deep today. I want to be philosophical. I want to maybe probe deeper than we normally do, because our guest today has, I think, written probably one of the more thought-provoking books, but really a primer on why we need common sense in this country. I mean, he's been working on this issue, to be fair, for a long time. My guest is Philip Howard. He is the leader of Government and Legal Reform in America. He is the chair of Common Good, a best-selling author many times over. He's advised both parties on needed reforms. He really homes in on this sense of atomization, enemy, powerlessness, feeling like we don't have agency, that is really tearing at our cultural fabric, our political institutions, and leaving us all to feel kind of disempowered, if you will. Philip, thank you for joining Dirty Moderate.
Great to be with you, Adam.
Thank you. And Philip's latest book, he's written other books, I should say, The Death of Common Sense, The Collapse of the Common Good, Life Without Lawyers, The Rule of Nobody, Try Common Sense, just 4 or 5 years ago, Not Accountable, about public employee unions and the relationship to government. And the latest book is Everyday Freedom, which is what we want to start with. So Philip, if I could start with this, people have to always say, why can't things be done easier? Why is everything bureaucratic? Why do we feel thwarted by red tape? Why, right? These are common layman questions. So I think I want to sort of dive deep and start with you by saying, well, if somebody says, like, we need more common sense in how we do things, what's common sense? How do you define it?
To me, common sense is not ultimate wisdom, although it can be used that way. To me, it's the opportunity for people to make sense of the situation before them, to be fair, to be able to make choices on the ground. And so when I wrote a book called The Death of Common Sense, it wasn't because I was saying there are a lot of idiots in the country. We were saying that we'd created a legal system that in effect preempts the ability of people to make sense. So that, for example, in a factory, there are so many worker safety rules and so many procedures that the people charged with safety go through the day with their noses in rule books, and they're not actually doing what's most important about safety, which is training and watching how people are really working. So training, or another example is nursing home. If you have too many rules for nursing homes, then there's not enough bandwidth for the people in the nursing home to actually think about what the residents actually need. There are studies about this that demonstrate how bureaucracy becomes counterproductive. So I'm not a quote deregulator. I'm all for overseeing, having a safe workplace or having good nursing homes. But my point is, in implementing those public goals, you have to leave room for people on the ground to use their judgment.
Yeah. I mean, I want to read something that you wrote, which I think can give people a framework as we dive into this, because really we're talking about a series of changes and implementations that grew out of the 1960s, came from the 1960s and grew out of that. I think philosophically speaking, before I go to what I'm going to read, because there seems to be a sense, which is something that I politically find anathema, which is that somehow we can socially engineer everybody to have perfect judgment, make perfect choices, live in a utopia, and get it right. People claim that's why I might have more conservative small c instincts. I don't disagree. I know that human nature is fallible and pretty rotten, and that we are never going to socially engineer our way to any kind of Xanadu. So we have to figure out how to operate, to your point, with proper regulation oversight in a democratic republic, but not lose our moorings and our bearings in the relationship we have as individuals vis-a-vis the state. So let me just read, so it can give listeners a little bit of foundation here, and then we can talk about it. So you write, legal architects in the 1960s thought that putting legal shackles on institutional authority would enhance freedom by eliminating unfair choices. But they achieved instead a paralytic system of red tape and legal demands. Freedom only exists within a culture of standards and values that people can rely upon. If the people in charge of institutions no longer have authority to make those value judgments, nothing much gets done sensibly or fairly. The resulting vacuum is filled by self-interested people claiming rights at the expense of everyone else. Bullies take over. Nature abhors a pretty horrible vacuum, right? Nature abhors a horrible vacuum. Right. So, I mean, I think that is so well put, and really is very, it really distills, I think, what people are feeling when they try to, like you said, put their relative in a nursing home or deal with the public school system, or, my God, try to zone something in an area, certainly Los Angeles.
Right, or run Harvard University.
Or well, they haven't been right. Somehow, being anti-Semitic cuts through the red tape, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, but talk to this. Talk to what happened in the '60s. I mean, I want readers and listeners both.
Yeah.
To understand.
Yeah. So we woke up to all these abuses, segregation, pollution, unsafe cars, gender discrimination, locking up disabled children and mental institutions, lies about Vietnam, and then sort of capped off by Watergate, right? So we had this decade, and with a bunch of assassinations throughout that. So we had this tumultuous decade where we woke up to really terrible values in our society that needed to change. And so we wrote new laws. We had the civil rights laws. We had the environmental laws. So all these things are good. But the experts at the time wanted to make sure that never again could we have bad values. So they thought that in the age of the computer, which was just coming on board then, that they could create a legal system like a software program that would not only tell people that they couldn't discriminate or they couldn't pollute and give them guidelines and rules to do that, but they could tell them exactly how to achieve a correct and fair, workplace.
Right.
And so there was never been such a thing as 1,000-page rule books before. Now we start getting 1,000-page rule books. And the idea of individual rights used to be the rights against state power.
Right.
The government can't come in. It was a shield. Government can't come in and take your home away or put you in jail without due process, that sort of thing. Now, the new rights were a supervisor in the workplace can't give you a bad recommendation without having to go to a legal hearing and prove that you have bad judgment or you don't cooperate well with others, or things that are kind of basically hard to prove. So progressively, we've had a kind of breakdown of these structures in society, starting with distrust, that have resulted in them not working. So take a public school, the teachers have lost control over order because the students have due process rights. So a kid, and there's stories like this, or a kid picks up a desk and throws it across the room, and the teacher has to do anything about it, has to endure a legal hearing to prove that Johnny threw the desk or whatever.
Right. But of course, they're not proficient in math or English. They can't pass a basic arithmetic test.
Oh. So in Chicago last year, there were 37 schools where not one student was proficient in reading or math. That's thousands of students, and no one in the Chicago school system has any authority to do anything about it. You can't change the personnel. You can't change the curriculum because of all these controls that have built up. In that case, they're to a great extent union controls, but those also came out of these laws that came out of the 1960s. So we have these situations where you have institutions where there's no mutual trust because everyone knows that performance doesn't matter. Well, without mutual trust, it's like letting the air out of the balloon. You're working in a kind of place where people sort of trudge from task to task instead of being excited and feeling pride. And Paul Volcker did some reports on civil service and basically said it just creates a terrible culture because people resent the fact that people who don't pull their weight, are treated the same.
Yeah, I mean, I also, one of the things you touch on in the book, which, and you just briefly mentioned it, but I wanted to unpack it with you because you are a celebrated attorney and a man of the Constitution. I always remind people, right? And you use the term state coercion, but I always remind people we've lost our way. And this, again, sounds ideological. And by the way, to people listening, I'm going to speak for Philip and I, we're not here making the Republican platform or the conservative movement's agenda. We're just trying to cut through the thicket of nonsense that inhibits human agency and the ability to understand properly what the Constitution does, which is where I'm going.
Right.
We are not protected by government, we're protected from government. And I think this is an important point about state coercion. In other words, it gets lost in our political conversation. Government is there, we are worried about state coercion across a variety of platforms, ideologically, philosophically, because that's the way how we're founded. And my point in saying this is that when you talk about replacing the red tape, let's call it, with a simpler framework, there is something implicit in there that says, with the expansion of government for many good reasons, right, came the expansion, as it does, of a very unwieldy kind of Leviathan that has taken over our ability to make judgments, calculations based on human agency and common sense. Is that fair?
So let me clarify for a second. So you can have government oversight,
right,
without having government having a little lawyer on your shoulder whispering in your ear all day long.
Right. Right.
So Australia a few decades ago had terrible nursing homes. They had a thick rule book telling people exactly how to, where to put the pictures on the wall, when to serve the meals, all that kind of stuff. And someone had the bright idea of scrapping the rule book and replacing it with 31 general principles. Have a home-like setting, respect the dignity of the residents, that sort of thing. The regulators still had authority, but now they were applying principles. So there was room for argument, right? There was room for argument. Yep. And so the experts scoffed at, these nursing home operators are going to get away with murder. So a year later, they went in to see what had happened. The nursing homes were twice as good.
Right.
And what happened was it turned out that when the people who worked at the nursing homes showed up in the morning, or they were focusing on what residents needed instead of complying with the paperwork and complying with the rules. And the vagueness of the principles didn't give the nursing home owner unlimited power to do whatever he wanted. It wasn't deregulation because there was still a regulator there and saying, no, this is bad, right? He could always give him a fine. They could appeal it up to a court. It ended up empowering the members of the family, of the residents, because now they could go, this would be more of a home-like setting if we planted gardens over here or something like that. So all of a sudden, instead of having a rule book that says every single nursing home has to be exactly the same, we started getting innovation. And so that's a situation where you don't have any less government oversight.
Right.
It's just much better government oversight.
That's right.
Yeah, right. And it's much more human. So when I'm arguing for restoring human agency, I'm making the point that conservatives have always gotten wrong.
Okay.
Which is that the authority of people in charge of an institution to use their common sense is critical to the authority of people underneath within the institution to use their common sense.
Right.
And so if the principal of a school doesn't have authority to do something differently, then the ideas of the parent or the teacher don't matter because everybody's just chained to the rule book. right?
Right.
Um, so it's really, so rehumanizing law. Law is not a software program. Law is, and the other thing about law,
Yeah.
law is a system of prohibitions. And you're right that law is there to protect us against misconduct. Nobody can, you can't commit a crime, you can't pollute, that sort of thing, right? And so it's like a fence around the field of freedom, and this offense protected by. But law is also supposed to affirmatively protect that field of freedom, so that people can interact honestly. They can be candid in the workplace, which nobody can be anymore, right? So, we might as well be a big sign that says, "Don't be yourself." Don't tell a joke, don't do anything, right? So, we go to video training sessions every year, mandatory. So the import of which is don't be yourself.
Yeah.
So law should be protecting all this. Instead, what law did after the 60s, instead of having a fence around the corral of freedom, law came into the field and said, here's exactly how you must light the doorway. Here's the paperwork you must keep to show that all these people did the mandatory training or whatever.
Right. It's an interesting distinction, I want to say, because there is something, and you allude to somebody I think wrote the best book on America ever, probably, was Tocqueville, right? Democracy in America, because when Tocqueville came over in the 1830s, he came over to actually study the penal system in Rhode Island, but he ended up taking this trip and seeing young America, antebellum America. But he observed, right, that there was a freedom of people to form civic associations and neighborhoods thrive. It was very unique, because the system allowed for such localism and, people could live their lives. But also the whole sort of overriding principle, which kind of was his thrust, was you have to balance freedom and equality, because equality can iron away nuance and human agency and being yourself in the name of some kind of freedom, but that actually turns out to be a conformity. And I think that is partially at work here, don't you? That there's, we're sort of, all these rules and all these laws are, every area is different, but there are so many rules and so many laws applied, like you said, to just govern things. It's very burdensome.
Well, it's anti-freedom,
right?
So what's great about this country, which immigrants have always found, is that you can invent yourself.
Yeah.
And you can wake up in the morning and you can take risk. You can try something new. You can meet new people who are fun and exciting to be with. You can learn. There's this kind of wonderful kind of fluidity, and you can be ambitious in an infinite number of ways, in coordinate with other people. And so if you create a system which is designed to avoid any mistake, which is what we've done, it ends up being a system of conformity. I don't know if you've read George Orwell's 1984 lately, but it's very much, it's all about conformity. You can never say the wrong thing. Welcome to the workplace. Welcome to the campus. You can never, everything has to conform. And so in the name of freedom, which we're now redefining in our society as the avoidance of a mistake rather than freedom. In the name of freedom, we've kind of undermined freedom. And that's, I think, at work behind the incredible contagion that Donald Trump supporters manifest. It's just like a contagion. It's people just hate being told how to do things and what to do, and they just want to burst out. And that's kind of and to me, I think that's mainly what's at work with Trump, is he's harnessing this incredible repression that turns into resentment.
Yeah, I mean, we here at Dirty Moderate, we are committed never Trumpers. We're not a member of either party. I'm unaffiliated. I have so many problems with the Democrats' unlimited faith in government, largely because I think it overstates the capacity of human nature to do good, but also because I know the attendant rules and burdens that come with it, which you outline about. I'm going to point an important one out in a second. But to your point about Trump, I think what people didn't understand and still didn't is that he's a disruptor. And what does that mean? Not a disruptor in that corporate jargony way. It's that there has been such an erosion of trust in mainstream institutions for a very, very, very long time. There really is, from your local post office to the government, to your school, to the health authorities during COVID. People have lost the ability to believe that they're being told the truth, and they feel that their ability to say what they want and do what they want, which has always been a hallmark of America within certain legal bounds, has been stifled, and they're acting out. I think it's so philosophical and psychological. It's much deeper than someone's just a racist or a sexist. That's at play, but I don't think that explains the frustration, a lot of which your book is explaining has a wellspring.
Yeah, well, there's a cognitive side to this. So one of the great things about writing, I've gotten to be very friendly with lots of different experts in different areas, and I have an economics appointment up at Columbia. I work with cognitive psychologists. So there was this area of psychology called cognitive overload, where the leading experts are in Australia, and basically, so if you give people too many restrictions that they can't internalize,
right?
You're following checklists all the time, right? Is that, and there's a role for checklists. Make sure you don't make a mistake, but not all day long, right? Right. If you give it to them all day long, what happens is it pulls people out of the smart part of their brain. So we have this like quantum computer in our unconscious that sorts through our training, our instinct, our values, our perceptions and stuff, and it arrives as judgment. We don't know what part of it arrives as judgment. It's just we often barely think it through. It arrives as a judgment. The conscious part of the brain is like an 8-bit processor. I mean, it's like, you might as well have a, first generation Mac or something, up there.
Right.
And so what happens when you give too many things, too many checklists that are not internalizable in the smart part of the brain, is it uses up the conscious part of the brain and freezes it so they can't access the smart part of the brain. So you make people go brain dead and you make them burn out. Right. So that the crisis in healthcare of doctors and nurses burning out is because they're spending half the day filling out forms that are completely not internalizable by any of their training, right? And it's exhausting. Mm-hmm. And it has nothing to do with, or it's little to do with taking care of patients. There's a friend of mine who told me a story. He got a former president of Johns Hopkins, got a call from a doctor friend who was recounting the story that was trying to, the reimbursement form kept getting bounced from the insurance company for some taking care of a patient. Bounced down. Finally got somebody on the phone. Said, why do you keep bouncing the form? They said, because you didn't check the box. Did you ask the patient whether she'd ever been a smoker? To which the doctor replied, I didn't check that box because the patient is 2 years old.
Right.
Yeah. So you have these systems that are designed, they're like central planning. They're designed for completeness, right? But they don't actually take into account the real world.
Listen, and on an everyday level, that's a great example. I mean, it's that says it all. But on a just my dad said I'm the son of a doctor, so I'm trying to use somebody who just isn't in the medical field or the legal field, and they're just trying to get something done, and they want to go to the store, they want to go to the post office and get something done. I mean, I'll give you an example. We all have to deal with the IRS, right? Even we have accountants. I had to change the address. Okay, the apartment number was just wrong on it, and instead of being able to go and do it online or do it quickly, I had to fill out a whole form with the old address, which is the same address with a missing number on the apartment, right? And here's the thing: you want to have it mailed in because you want to sign it, and if you don't have it properly signed through the autofill system, I mean, all this is boring. My point is, who has time for this? You know, if you're raising 3 kids and you're a single parent and you got to get the address, I mean, there's no help. If they will not process it unless you write that exactly as it is, mail it in, you know, and then you got to go to the UPS store. It's just, and I know this sounds like a quotidian thing, like, oh, we all have to do it, but these are the things that drive people bananas. This is the cognitive overload, don't you think?
And as a matter of cognitive thinking, if you're doing that. So sometimes you have a task like that and you've wasted 2 hours because you had to go up and do this stuff, right? It just takes you away. If you're actually sort of trying to just do your job, but throughout trying to do your job, where you're trying to rely on your intelligence about how to do whatever you do, you're being yanked out of your intelligence when somebody says, can you demonstrate this or demonstrate that? Then all of a sudden, and there are studies about this, people make worse judgments.
They do. And I want to go to your book because I love this part of the book. By the way, page 40, for those that have the latest copy. I want to jump on that point. Here's what Philip writes. As a tool for informing judgment, process can be helpful. To instill trust in personnel decisions, for example, most large employers have a review process before terminating an employee. Environmental reviews, when focused on significant impacts, can provide transparency and public input before an infrastructure project is approved. As a mechanism to prove judgment, however, procedures deter choices and cause paralysis. Personnel choices, for example, are not susceptible to objective verification. How do you prove someone doesn't try hard or is uncooperative or has bad judgment? Or how do you prove that a teacher just goes through the motions or doesn't engage students? In The Moral Life of Schools, you write, Professor Philip Jackson and colleagues found that whether teachers were effective or ineffective often turned on subtle personality traits. I mean, very interesting, right? And so then you go on, making people prove judgments that are based on perceptions and intuitions removes the everyday freedom needed to make things work. The proof is in the pudding, you know, about the way human authority, when constrained, as you describe it, and hemmed in and devoid of the ability to use common sense, actually adversely affects the result.
Yeah. You know, it's really irrefutable. I mean, if you go into every area, healthcare, schools, relations in the workplace, black-white relations, you know, this kind of forced politeness just drives people apart. And there's studies on this too. It doesn't reduce bias. No, it actually exacerbates bias because people assume there must be something wrong or whatever. But so it doesn't work. You know, we practically feel the ground shaking with, you know, all the populism, you know, over the country, and nobody's presenting a new governing vision to deal with this. I mean, not even Trump. I mean, Trump is you know, like a feral genius, right? He's a genius at scratching the, you know, issue of resentment, but he doesn't have a governing vision of how to fix anything. And he's not somebody who could actually do it, because being a leader of an institution, ultimately, probably the most important thing in an institution is have leadership that's trusted. You know, you have a legal system that's trusted, a framework of people who are trusted to enforce the standards and the values, you know, of that institution. Well, you know, that's not who Donald Trump is. He's kind of an attack dog, right? I mean, you know, that's so it's you know, I'm just writing something about this now. I mean, we really need to fill this vacuum And we need to fill the vacuum not necessarily with a new party or new thing. We need to fill it with a movement that says, put humans in charge again.
Yeah, I want to give you a good example of this. I was explaining to somebody the other day why I was against the Anti-Inflation Act that Biden and the Democrats passed. It was previously the Build Back Better bill, something like $6 trillion. They whittled it down to $3 trillion. Progressives decrying it, whining, carrying on. How could we fail America? We're not going to have our utopia. Let me talk. Speaking of human judgment and speaking of common sense, the Anti-Inflation Act has not a single line in it. Okay, with all the investment it makes. No, listen to this. With all the investment it makes, I only recently found this. I was against it for other reasons, but now I'm really against it. It has not a single line in it, Philip, for small businesses. Not a one. It doesn't apply, meaning all the climate investment, it only applies to big corporations and the government. Here's the thing. 65% roughly, give or take, and studies vary, 65%, 62% of all jobs are created by small business, right? I'm a small business owner. I've been for a long time in many businesses. It's the engine of everything. The act at that cost, 3.5 trillion, the money has no meaning anymore. It's always like billion, trillion, zillion, nobody. And you would have thought, to make your point, there was not a human being anywhere, an advisor who isn't a government bureaucrat, someone who's actually met a payroll, who's been in the real world, who could have said, hey, guys, I know that this is like sticking it to the fat cats and this is great for progressives to go on the House floor and high five, but the vast majority of Americans run small businesses and this doesn't apply to them. So what the hell is this bill? But, right? I mean, no, they have to go through rules. Yeah, but where were the people that said, hey, let's bring in like 5 small business people, random people from around the country? It's the old Bill Buckley thing. You remember the famous thing? I'd rather look in the phone book and hire someone than someone that went to Harvard's business school. It's that kind of, anyway. So.
Well, it's interesting about small business. I was just looking at the numbers on this. Small business, maybe, I think there are only 2 or 3 institutions in the country that a preponderance of people trust. And I think one is the military and one is small business. And why is that? It's because of the human connection, right? It's human. You can talk about the stain, with the person at the dry cleaners. You can, whatever. So there's a lesson there. So why don't we rehumanize some bigger businesses? Why don't we make it so that a bigger business can also pretend that everybody who works there is a real individual, unique human being and can be treated, like a real unique human being instead of treated like a factor of production, which is kind of how workplaces now are organized to treat people.
That's right. I mean, and I think like why, government has gotten big because we live in a big country, and that's been going on a long time. But to your point about, you're not saying get rid of government, you're not saying deregulate, but you're saying, and I'm asking, I always ask this, and I do this every day now as my life, and I've been engaged with politics since I'm 14. Why is it that nobody, right, could have thought to bring in some actual small business owners to talk about the bill? They just passed this bill, which is, again, everything's in these triumphalist broad terms, but all the change we've made. Forget about the rest of the bill. Forget about. But we live in a huge country, huge, and you're being told that this helps the people. But when you really look at and you really, really unpack it, it doesn't really help as many people as you think it's going to help, and that's a problem.
Washington. Well, let's be honest about it. I mean, Washington. And this is always the case, not unique to this particular Washington, but the places that run institutions, they always take a life of their own. Yeah. They always end up being playgrounds for the status quo and people elbowing their way at the public trough, trying to get money. Yeah. And the Inflation Reduction Act was $3 trillion being divided up by people who are at the trough, not small business, who are at the trough, elbowing each other out of the way to get things and to get special set-asides for this group or that group. And so it's Washington is one of those places that's that's overdue for spring cleaning. And frankly, something is going to change. I mean,
Yeah.
you feel it. You feel the ground shaking. But my concern, and the reason I wrote Everyday Freedom,
Yeah.
is my concern is that no one presented a vision about how it ought to change. And so I propose a governing philosophy which re-empowers the everyday freedom of people to take responsibility and be accountable for how they do.
Right.
And to let people access their judgment, let people live their values, let communities, like Tocqueville said, let communities do things in their own ways. We don't have to have the people in Utah provide services the same way that people in New York City do, right? There's going to be a different way. Let people have ownership and pride in how they do things. I mean, the reason you feel pride is because you figured out how to do something well by yourself. That you figured out. It's not because you followed the rules. It's not because it's not because you don't feel pride because you fill out a multiple choice test the right way, or not much. So I think ultimately, you can dig deep, and I have, into all these issues. I think one of the core problems here is that we lost we no longer believe in belief. We've lost the idea that human judgment is valid. We got this idea that you have to be able to verify or prove. And there was a political scientist called Alan Wolf who was doing some studies. He said in America today, there's now an 11th commandment: "Thou shalt not judge." And so being judgmental is like a accusation, right? Well, human judgment, for the reasons we were saying, is not. You can't kind of dissect. You can't pull it apart like strands of DNA and edit it. It happens. You can judge it. You can say this person has bad judgment, but you can't actually unpack it very well. You can,
we all make judgments because we make judgments in our life every moment of every day. And the question is, how do we use it? Right? I mean, human beings make judgments, and that's
right. And so, but we got this idea that subjectivity, believing something right around, like art. What's good art, right?
Right.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
I mean, I think, I'm not an art historian. I think Rembrandt strikes me as pretty good, right?
Yeah.
I think that some graffiti by a street artist is perhaps, to me, less meaningful.
Me too.
And so I'm willing.
Modern art, like the whole thing of like, you ever go to a museum to this point, speaking of subjectivity, and the docent will be, there'll be like the famous white canvas, and there'll be like 3 blotches of red. That's it. And they'll be telling you, and the interesting interlocking nexus of this is about an existential crisis. And I'm going, what? This doesn't make any sense. I don't follow. It's just poetry can be like that. And look, I was, like I said, deeply academic, but certain things I'm just like, I don't get it. But there are people that like it who do.
Right. And that's right. So people, right. So there are many different places in a free country, like atoms bouncing around in a test tube. We ought to be able to go to the places that we like. I can go to the Rembrandt wing, and somebody else can go to contemporary art. But the point about subjectivity is it's not somehow less valid. I mean, subjectivity is not the enemy of freedom. No. Subjectivity is the essence of freedom.
Correct.
That's what freedom is. It's what you value and believe, right? And being in a free society should allow you to live your life in accord with those beliefs and values, and other people can judge you based on that. But we've somehow put subjectivity in the penalty box, which means we put freedom in the penalty box, and it really is madness. And a lot of smart people have warned us against this. I mean, Solzhenitsyn, Václav Havel.
Yep.
You know, if you try to turn society, this is Havel, into a kind of crossword puzzle where all the pieces fit, it never works.
No.
And if you try to achieve equality by constantly giving more and more to some group that wants more equality, what happens is, in Tocqueville time, it's an ever receding line.
It is.
You can never achieve it because everybody's always going to be different in some way. Nobody's ever going to be the same.
That's
and
right.
You know, there was that great short story by Kurt Vonnegut called Harrison Bergeron, where the way society was organized is that people would be made equal. So if you were a good athlete, you had to wear weights. If you were beautiful, you had to wear a mask. If you were intelligent, you had electrodes put in your brain to shock you when it went too much. You know, it was a parody written, you know, 1960 or something like that. But we've tried to do that by turning life into a compliance manual, and people are compliance workers, you know, and it just doesn't. I mean, the ground is shaking. I mean, we have to change it, and there has to be a new vision.
Well, I think there's two things that I also got from reading your book, or made me think about two things, which I think are cousins to this, corollaries. I pick a word that I talk about on my show. Number one, I think the collapse of the old Tip O'Neill adage that all politics is local has been a real problem, because everything is so nationalized. To your point, Utah has to do what New York does, what it has to do, you know, every election is literally about everybody. 330 million people have two choices and that's it. Everything is, you know what I mean? We used to have, parties were more regionalized. You know, we had more choices. People felt they could vote Republican, sometimes Democrat, sometimes. Everything wasn't quite as near the precipice in that way. But the second thing you had me thinking about, to your point, is that when we've moved away from the sort of traditional view of equality, and we start talking about equity, we start getting into the Solzhenitsyn, Václav Havel mess of just trying to make Tocqueville, making it better, making it perfect, giving more, you know, not equality of opportunity, but equality of results, which can't be achieved and has been thrust upon us in a lot of our institutions, academia, you know, in the name of historical injustice. But it's like, you know, it's what Groucho Marx famously said: politics is about drawing all the wrong conclusions and applying all the wrong remedies. You know, it's that kind of thing. We can be against injustice. We can be against, obviously, hatred. And we by the way, but we've created a tangle with everything, to your point. It's very, very, you know.
And, you know, there's so many things wrong, just as a matter of kind of human physics with the system we've created. One of them is that people argue for more law, more scenes, more benefits on the basis of distrust of whoever the professor is, or the university president is, or the supervisor is, right? Who knows what bias lurks in the head? And of course, because so much of it's unconscious, we don't know ourselves. But you can't ultimately create a healthy society or a healthy institution grounded in distrust, because trust is the one essential ingredient of any organization of people working together. If there's no trust, then all of a sudden everything slows down. Not nearly as much goes on. Confucius famously said, you know, of all the things that you could never give up in a society, you give up wealth, you can give up all sorts of things, but you can never give up trust, because people can't communicate with trust. And so we've built this entire system. And by the way, Trump is, you know, scratching at this as hard as he can. It's all grounded in distrust. It's the politics of distrust. It's the social media of distrust. You know, and there's a human instinct to go towards distrust, right? Like fear of, you don't go swimming in the ocean because because you fear a shark's going to bite you. So, it's the overweighting of, low probabilities. And so we have this wallowing in distrust.
Right.
And nothing could work.
Right. And, just to sort of talk about Tocqueville and sort of finish with him, finish our conversation on him. I love when you write this, speaking of Tocqueville again, because important to what we were talking about. You write, the human need for agency to feel that our ideas and effort make a difference. This is so good. This is so important for people who are listening. Is expressed not only in our families and workplaces, it is also expressed in our community activities with neighbors, with the PTA and the Little League, with the church or synagogue, and with local charities and government. Tocqueville considered, quote, the art of associating together, end quote, to be essential, and he continues, quote, if men are to remain civilized. His observations of America, which were all these little counties and populaces and little self-governing communities, we've grown. That's been going on for a long time, but our feet as citizens remain on the ground. Our sense of who we are, to your point, when our life is a regular interaction with the dry cleaner about the stain, as you put it, or the local teacher, but not when, oh my God, Timmy's suffering in school and you get a teacher who says there's nothing I can do and you fill out a bureaucratic form and go home and then you get a grievance letter. It's like nothing's changed. You feel completely alienated from the most intimate of interactions, the art of associating. And I think the legal framework that emerged, that you so rightly say has been stifling, I think along with the growth of government, the growth of population and mistrust, but I think it really supplanted our ability to connect to one another as people using our best judgment. I know it sounds abstract, but it isn't. We as humans use our best judgment not to drive too close to a road, on a mountain. I mean, there's things we do. We know, right? Not to leave a candle. We should know. Don't leave a candle burning when you leave your house. We don't need a rule book for everything, and then magnify that, writ large into the operations of government, and you get, to my point, an anti-inflation act with small business not benefiting.
It's rippled up and down the system. And ultimately, I think we need to give people back ownership of who they are, how they do things, and to be accountable to government for not meeting whatever the legitimate goals of government are too. But free people need to be free. They need to have agency. And we have a federal government now. It's 150 million words long. The U.S. Constitution is 7,500 words. You can create legal systems that are very effective, that people can actually internalize and understand, that will be better regulatory systems and make people and give people the authority to do what they think is right and sensible. And I think America needs it, and I think we need a new movement based on basically putting humans back in charge again. And it's a centrist movement. It's not about conservative or liberal policies. You could have people who, both sides, joining this. It's a human movement, and I think that would go a long way toward calming the storms in this country.
Yeah. Well, Philip, thank you. I mean, look, I'm nothing. I'm a dirty moderate because I'm nothing if not a hybrid of a variety of positions that I think I've arrived at, of course, intellectually, but through common sense. I can't go through a checklist and just say I'm all these things or I'm all that thing. I'm all those things. And I think that's, to your point, what we need is humans being able to be humans again, using judgment, making decisions, but again, grounded in trust and with freedom that is not only expansive, but that isn't inhibiting, or as someone blurbed your book and said freedom should be an upward spiral of wisdom and common sense, something to that effect. I don't remember who said it.
Right, Jonathan Haidt,
right.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I thought that's it. And you know what? We can only start there, but I think we all have to start local too. I think it goes back to that. Because a one size fits all would, paradoxically undermine your entire cause. I mean, you'd have to go and allow communities and then states to be able to experiment with ways of doing things.
Yeah. Well, that was the point. That's the point of everyday freedom. It's just to get people thinking about why can't others take ownership for things in my own community, in my own life, and my own workplace, and redevelop the camaraderie and the sense of pride that made this country so great.
Yeah. Yeah. As my producer just posted, we cannot continue to be a free nation if we are going to be ballerinas weighted down with sandbags.
Right.
So many ways. But Philip, I think the book's terrific for those who are listening. Make sure you get it. It's out now, Everyday Freedom. Philip K. Howard. Make sure you get the right Philip Howard. Also, he's written, as I said, The Death of Common Sense, which is a great one. I remember that from the 90s, actually. Life Without Lawyers. Definitely check out Not Accountable, because we should have another discussion, Philip, about getting the public employee unions out of negotiating against us, the taxpayers, the government. That makes no sense to me. FDR didn't want it, as you point out. Anyway, it's been great to chat with you. I hope today that we didn't just enlighten. I hope we're able to leave with a victory for common sense, when people hear the episode.
Well, I think it's going to require people to, in their own lives, to decide that they want to support a change in this direction and to start talking to their friends about it and such. It's going to require movement. Anyways, This is great. I love this conversation and look forward to talking with you again.
All right, Philip. Thank you for joining us, folks. As always, stay dirty, stay moderate, and stay safe.